Hello, this is Road to Neuralink number 1. So I'm reading How to Create a Mind by Ray Kurzweil. A little bit of a controversial figure in terms of how I've seen other intellectuals view him, but still a very good read. I don't know enough to say whether his pattern recognition theory of mind is a correct explanation of how the brain actually works, but it's interesting nonetheless. I'm curious to find out how his theory compares to the other prevailing theories in the realm of neuroscience in terms of creating a full explanation of how the brain works and how... My neighbors are being very loud. They're causing my pattern recognizers to experience annoyance. His main theory in this book is the pattern recognition theory of mind. I'm struggling to understand some of the things he brings forth in here. In summary, looks like the parentals are home. In summary, what he talks about is your brain is composed of, you've heard, brain is the most complicated thing in the universe and has 1 billion neurons and 1 trillion connections between all those neurons. Kurzweil in this book attempts to simplify that very large and scary statement into, yes, there's these billions of neurons and the trillions of connections between them, but it is mostly redundant, repeated patterns of little pattern recognizing modules, which he estimates to be composed of around 100 neurons. These little pattern recognition modules are repeated all throughout the neocortex, which is the new rind. I think neocortex is Latin for new rind. I believe he mentions that in the beginning of the book. So the neocortex and other parts of the brain are filled with these pattern recognition modules, which when they recognize a pattern, for instance, a hand. Actually, let's use the example he showed in the book. The example he uses in the book for demonstrating the power of the pattern recognition theory of mind is what would happen within the neocortex when you see the letter A, for instance. So you're not actually seeing the letter A initially. First, you have low-level pattern recognizers to recognize the edges of the A. I don't have a piece of paper nearby. Recognizes distinct pieces of the A, so there's the bottom 2 bars, the crossbar that goes across the middle, the triangle formed on top, and other variations of the letter A. And so there's pattern recognizers, which through your experiences have learned to light up when they see these low-level patterns. When they do, they signal up the hierarchy to a higher level pattern. So you've had all these lower level ones for these specific shapes that comprise an A. They're going to send a signal up the pattern recognition hierarchy to the pattern recognition module for the actual letter A, and they're going to say, hey, I think we've seen an A. So now that module will fire up and say, okay, we've got all the requisites for A. Surely you're not going to see this letter by itself. Perhaps there's a P next to it, and you're actually reading the word apple. So all the other letters have fired all the way up to L. You've had all the recognizers for A, P, P, and L fire. Now your brain somehow, and this is where I get a little shaky, will signal down the hierarchy to all the little compositions that make up the letter E, and it'll say, hey, we've seen the word apple in the past. So far we've detected an A, a P, and an L. We expect to see an E in the near future. Be ready. So now all the pattern recognizers for the letter E decrease their threshold for needing to be activated so that you are prepared to quickly respond and recognize the letter E. I apologize if this explanation is long-winded. It's certainly a confusing book to read, especially since I have no background in any of the neuroscience or complicated subjects he's bringing up. But I want to become better in all of these things over the next couple of years so that I can get on the Neuralink team and begin creating high bandwidth brain interfaces to connect machines and minds together to change the world. I'm very passionate about this, and I hope I can continue to learn more. This is just episode 1 think I'll do one of these every day until I get hired. Just describing the things I've learned in that day. In fact, I'm going to be reading a lot more today, so this won't be the end of this. The thing I wanted to specifically note that I read out of chapter 6 on page 119 of How to Create a Mind is he's talking about the neurological basis for love and all the chemicals that are released when a mammal is falling in love. So he brings up the example of chemicals that encourage long-term bonds. He lists a couple here, and then he says, this also includes oxytocin and vasopressin. He says, consider two related species of moles, the prairie mole and the montane vole. They're pretty much identical, except the prairie mole has no receptors for oxytocin and vasopressin, whereas the montane vole does not. The prairie vole is noted for lifetime monogamous relationships, while the montane vole results almost exclusively to one-night stands. What I'm wondering with that is if the lack of oxytocin and vasopressin receptors extends to humans. So I've noticed amongst people there seems to be a certain proclivity amongst cheaters to cheat often. And perhaps there's a neurological basis for that. You know, being cheated on sucks. And we often view people who are what's the word? Who pursue infidelity in a relationship as just absolute pieces of garbage, which we should. We want to discourage that behavior for, you know, increasing the probability that more people are going to have successful relationships. We don't want to incentivize infidelity, but we often view those people as pieces of garbage. Perhaps it's not necessarily their fault. Perhaps they just have a genetic proclivity due to a lack of vasopressin and oxytocin receptors for cheating, because this the montane vole, which doesn't have these oxytocin and vasopressin receptors, are pretty much determinative as to the nature of their love life. I'm just reading through this passage. He even says these chemicals are influential on humans as well. Voles have a neocortex, but it's just essentially scaled up in humans because our neocortex is way larger. So perhaps we could create a drug or some sort of genetic therapy to increase the number of vasopressin and oxytocin receptors in someone's brain to decrease the probability that they will cheat in a relationship or, I don't know, have other bad behavior. I don't know what the other associated effects of lack of oxytocin and vasopressin receptors are. Anyways, that's what I was reading so far. I'll have more to come back with. I will finish chapter 7 tonight as well. So I read for a little while longer into chapter 7 of How to Create a Mind and quickly discovered there's a way out of my league. There's going to be... To understand the material discussed in chapter 7 will probably take me a month. Let me see if I can just hold my phone there between my legs. Let's see. Where did I start getting confused? Okay. He talks about there's a section starting on page 135 called Sparse Coding, Vector Quantization. That is a scary sounding term in and of itself. I was sure though that it could be simplified. Maybe I didn't give it enough of a read. Maybe I just need to sleep on it. Probably going to reread this passage before I go to bed. Yeah. Chapter 7 is a mess. I don't understand reading your mind with hidden Markov models. He talks more about neural nets. Oh. genetic algorithms appears to be discussed later on. It's a whole hot stinking mess, and I don't understand 1% of the things he says. Starting on the vector quantization, even some of the stuff about neural nets was a little confusing, so there's a lot of learning that will have to be done there. I think the biggest thing I could do at this point is to hook up with a Brilliant or a SkillShare subscription and then work through their computer science and machine learning programs. I think that would be valuable. I think one of the other things I need to do is get a really deep understanding of machine learning, neural nets, and the physiology of the brain so that I can increase the probability of getting hired at Neuralink. Anyways, this is number 1 of Path to Neuralink. Gosh, I'll probably make a couple hundred of these by the time we're done. Anyways, signing off. Stay safe.